time, there were a lot of funders who were very focused there because there were champions working inside the foundations who got it. You need more champions. Women and girls programs, when I used to run a women's nonprofit, and when I was running women's nonprofit, we had Beth Smith from Hyams, and we had Ellen Remmer working on, remember the girls and women group of funders that came together and funded this work and educated other funders about this work. I mean, it still happens, but not in the same way. So I think it's time for some more, get back the champions and bring in new ones who are going to say, wait a second, we have to talk about girls. We need to talk about women again, you know. These are real issues that are really important, and they are connected to the economy, and they're connected to our families in every piece of the work that we're doing. Richard was the first, at least the first funder I knew, who put his neck out around criminal records reform. And then other funders jumped on the bandwagon. I was one of those funders who jumped on the bandwagon. But he started. You had to have a champion, someone. You know, you can't tell sometimes when we're in these suits, like who's going to champion us. Look at our bios, find out what we're about. There are people in foundations who know your issue and care about it or have a personal experience. Get in with them, get to know them, build a relationship, and they have relationships, and that's how you get more people interested in what you're doing. But I think getting the champions really makes a difference.
And I would also say, frame it as the large-scale social change you know it to be. What foundation is not interested in large-scale social change? I mean, so I think you can do that. What you're doing is making that kind of change for girls and women in our culture. And framing it that way may help it seem more relevant.
Great. Oh, that's right. This question, that question, and I think we're
Thank
great.
you. My name is Karen Glover, and the comments that were made earlier about the limitations on 501c3 lobbying.
Can people hear her?
I can speak up.
Okay.
Okay. So the comments that were made earlier about the limitations on 501c3 lobbying has me thinking about the lack of restriction on corporations. And in fact, the Supreme Court now saying that corporations have the same First Amendment speech rights as individual citizens. So is there anyone taking on the status quo of that issue?
No. In fact, it was so interesting. I forgot to bring up that point that now for-profit corporations have unlimited ability to use their resources for speech and politics. And remember when I was talking about the balance? It's tipping. Nonprofits, really, folks, are losing their political voice in their communities very fast. There's no way we can make up dollars, you know, to them in the same way. There is a member of my board actually has an organization called freespeechforpeople.org, and there is a national campaign around how to address this. But the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court came out with this decision, it makes it a long haul to try to change it. They're trying to get a federal constitutional amendment to say a corporation isn't a person. And no one in here is saying corporations are bad. We're saying that, but should they have more speech than other people? And people whose lives are being affected and are very vulnerable? I think the answer is no. And so, you know, there are some people who have, some speech is emphasized more than others. And in this culture, it's often by money. And the folks who lose out are the people who don't have their, you know, voices amplified. So there is some work being done around it, not enough. We tried to do some funding of organizations to take on this issue locally, and they didn't apply for it. It was very interesting. There were groups who applied for other things in our portfolio, but I think this one was kind of like, whoa, this is big. I don't know if we can handle this one. So we need to do something about it because what I see is just a constant, you know, I feel like nonprofits are really compromised in their leaders in terms of advocacy, whereas we say for other sectors, it's fine, go right ahead.
Thank you for raising that question. But something quick, I wanted to get one more question in to go.
I'm sorry.
Just one point related to this is that I actually think that you're absolutely correct, but I also think there's a lot of misinformation out there about what nonprofits can do around lobbying and public policy work. And if I hear another organization say we can't do this, it just drives me crazy because you can. You know, there are rules around things, but I think that for the most part, a blanket statement around we can't lobby or anything like that is just a mistake. And unfortunately, there's a lot of nonprofits who think that way. So that has to change.
Really quickly, Alan asked, what is our sector's agenda? Asked that question. That would be a really interesting thing to put on the agenda. How do we get parity for the nonprofit world with the private sector? If changing it on the other end is not likely to happen, well, you know, this culture does believe in fairness to some degree, and let's make it more fair. I like that as a possible agenda.
Great. Thank you. One last question. Yes.
Okay. Different subject, but one that we've touched upon. And I think important to the state of the sector is there's just too many of us.
Yeah, that was.
So how do you make some judgment? Where do funders?
Can people hear him? Maybe speak up a little closer in there.
Where do funders look? What kind of measurements or gut feelings do funders look at it and say an organization is not well established? It's too new. It's too small. We hear that there are thousands, tens of thousands of new nonprofit organizations incorporated every year. So how do you handle that?
I'm not sure I want it, but I'll. Well, I mean, the day-to-day of how you handle it is you sit there and you pour through a lot of paper and you vet a lot of things. There are, you know, too many is pejorative. I will say there are a significant number of overlapping organizations. One thing we love to see is organizations coming in together, saying we're partnering with each other, we're going to work together, we're going to leverage each other's resources, and we're going to build something better for you. If you can do that, you absolutely will have a leg up.
Great.
First, answer the question, what difference we're making, and then answer the second one, what difference are we going to make? Because I think that that's really what people are looking at, you know, is this the right organization that's going to take us to the place or drive the kind of change that we think needs to happen. I think if we're able, when I say we, I'm thinking about the staff in these foundations, to be able to talk about those issues amongst our peers, and I think it makes those decisions easier, you know, to really to push on them. But I think that it starts with, you know, really what difference are we making? Because we have to answer that question. And then, you know, in terms of the collaborations, I think all of those things are really important. I don't believe forced collaboration works. I think the people need to sort of, you know, it needs to be a natural kind of a collaboration. And sort of, I remember Alan was talking about sort of that win-win, and he was talking about the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. I think it really means sitting down and really finding the ways to work together that really help you move that particular issue or agenda. So.
Great. I'm sure you all, there's this new fund, the Catalyst Fund, to help nonprofits merge, ally, do all of those things. So that's recently been launched. We don't have any more time for more questions. I apologize. I wanted to ask the panel just one last closing question, which is just a real simple one, which is if you had to describe, like, if you gave a word or a brief phrase that describes the sector today, and then what you expect it will be like when we meet here a year from now, what would that be? So, Kelly, we'll start with you.
I would say compromised by our economy and our restrictions and to somewhat our imagination because it's a tough time. And I think a year from now, I think it could be the same if we don't allow the innovation and the freedom to innovate in a more creative way and keep funding as best as we can. We dug into our endowment during tough times. That was not easy to do, but this is what you got to do in tough times sometimes. You have to stick with the groups and stick with the community.
Great.
I would say transforming, I would say now, you know, but I think a year from now we'll still be transforming. That's one of the problems. But I do think when I say that, I mean in a different way. I would hope. I think that, you know, seeing us working much more collaboratively together would be really, really critical in terms of making things happen. I think the other is, you know, just, you know, we are community foundations. We are nonprofits. We're learning every single day. And as long as we're continuing to learn from our experiences so that we don't repeat the kinds of mistakes and the challenges of the past, we're really thinking about the issues going forward, I think we'll be fine. But I see us in a chronic state of transformation. So.